Thank you so much on behalf of everyone here for all your valued insights. You will be able to ask questions in a short while. And now I will welcome Signe Normann to the microphone to give a short wrap-up.
So I have been given the very difficult task of shortly summarizing the importance of what we have just heard for Danish in a Danish context. I will do my best. So, first of all, we were reminded that biodiversity is wonderful. We saw these wonderful pictures of marine life. That is why, among other things, why we are protecting, why we are here today. We end up, basically, it's quite depressive because the goals are not met on so many parameters. So thank you for that. But you also show that there is a huge pressure on marine life. Human activities is a problem all across Europe and in Denmark. So when we in Denmark and the Biodiversity Council estimate 2% of the Danish seas with certainty can be considered as protected, we are not unique. But still, we are a little bit better than the European average. But there's still a long way for being actually meeting the goal. And one of the questions I would like to raise today is it enough that we're just not doing it as worse as the others? We often tend to have that perception in Denmark, that if the others are also doing it bad, we don't need to do it better. If we just follow the rules as we might interpret them, it also doesn't matter. So the question is, maybe we should start thinking about what is the goal, what is the ambition for biodiversity in Denmark, and then starting to do the actions that we actually create more, bigger and better nature in Denmark. Martin, you illustrated that it's really difficult to go from just protected areas to also assure that they make a difference. And that is basically this challenge of we can protect, but we need to do something afterwards. Restore, assure that they actually give the quality that biodiversity needs. So, and then to the next, restoration. And the big challenge we will have in the near future of understanding how much of Denmark should be basically restored, re-established according to the European environmental law. You brought several important points that I think we will need to take with us and discuss more today. But one of them especially is, how do we basically assure that the goals we set, the plans we make, will make a difference? What should be re-established? How do we get to actually know how much should be re-established? The council, we have looked at these numbers. That is about 17% of the Danish areas, up to that, for both land and seas, that need to be or is under the European Restoration Law. But there might be more. We just don't know. So we need to get towards that. And then the last point. Who decides what matters? When I read the text, I was reading several times. You didn't say it, but maybe you can elaborate afterwards. That the plan needs to be based on scientific evidence, and I was, of course, reading all over the place. Then you can't make a plan if it doesn't follow science. So that stands in there everywhere. But is that something we will apply to in Denmark? Will we use the best scientific evidence for guiding us for restoring and re-establishing nature? But thank you very much.
Thank you. And now to your short questions, preferably in English. Yeah? You'll have a microphone. Please say your name.
Thank you. Daniel Lux, and my question is either to Martin or to Juliette. So freshwater makes 1% of the global area, yet more than 10% of the global species live in freshwater. It falls under your part, the land. But I don't hear much specific plans for freshwater and restoration, yet up to 85% of the species of freshwater species are under threat compared to the level of 1970. So maybe someone can elaborate a bit more on freshwater?
Yeah, and you're totally right. Freshwater is actually very central to the European biodiversity strategy. I mean, there's the aim, for instance, to have over, I think it was 3 million kilometers of free-flowing rivers across Europe, as well as, of course, also the increase in the condition of many of the freshwater species populations, as well as the habitats. It should be highlighted that the 30% actually on land is inclusive of freshwater. It's explicitly stated. So 30% on land, it's still not working, but anyway. The 30% on land should be inclusive of the freshwater portion as well. And I guess in most cases, what I described is, of course, we're doing a lot of the terrestrial work. I know of colleagues who are working on very similar efforts, of course, also on the freshwater side exclusively. But one should not forget, and I think this was also highlighted by Juliette, that all realms, terrestrial, marine, freshwater, are connected. What you do on a terrestrial area has implications on freshwater, and what happens in freshwater happens also ultimately in marine and coastal areas too. So there can't be seen in isolation.
Yeah. More questions? Yes?
Thank you very much, and I'm Kirsten Carlsen from University of Copenhagen. My question actually goes to, you say you want to do, we want to make projects that makes a difference in all sort of realms, the terrestrial and the marine and the freshwater. So my question goes to, what are the demands for long-term monitoring of all the efforts that we're putting in place? We hear several times this morning that we actually don't know much about the impact of the things that we're initiating. So I think it's a general question to all of you. Are there any obligations towards actually putting in place long-term monitoring and evaluation of all the things, or is it something that takes place coincidental when we have funding, when there's a PhD, taking it up? I hope you can say something about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so... Oh, I see. Okay. No. There is obligations related to monitoring in the nature restoration law. It's part of the mandatory content of the National Restoration Plan, is a plan for how to monitor. But of course, the big gap will always be the availability of funding for that monitoring. And again, there's another question of prioritization. So do member states, cognizant of their own funding landscape, do they prioritize putting in place restoration measures, or do they prioritize the monitoring aspect? We don't know, but there is an obligation to do so. Just to quickly add on rivers, the nature restoration law has specific obligations related to river systems as well, but I didn't mention them for time.
Thank you for your question. Can I just add something about the marine environment? There's also the Marine Strategy Framework Directive that I didn't talk about because it mostly requires states to develop strategies, right? But it should include monitoring. It's also being reviewed now. We don't know for how many other years, right? But it should be reviewed, so it might include more about monitoring. And then it also relies on states and how they directives. So for example, the Habitats Directive in France now includes a monitoring requirement of fishing impacts. So they're doing these assessments in all habitats marine sites, and it's enormous, and it should be accompanied by measures. Of course, we don't know how this is going to end, but at least we've never had that much monitoring about fishing impacts, so it's huge.
More questions? No? Then we will continue with the program. Oh, there is a question. Oh, there's an answer.
I could also say a few words. At least on the European side, there is a lot of interest in monitoring. It's not being left behind. There's actually, in the moment, the formation of a new European biodiversity monitoring center and system that basically across Europe, and that will also ultimately be very instrumental, of course, into following up with the targets of the biodiversity strategy, because, for instance, target 2 and 3 about the favorable reference values of many of these sites and so forth. So it's really, ultimately we need the monitoring, because otherwise there cannot be a successful accounting, how we're actually making a difference.